Hello and welcome to the TID Water and Power Podcast. I'm your host, Constance Anderson, and on this month's episode, we're discussing the district's irrigation operations. TID was the first irrigation district formed in California, and today provides safe and reliable irrigation water to more than 4,700 growers. More impressively, TID does so through 250 miles of gravity-fed canals, many of which are original canals built more than 120 years ago. On this episode, I'm joined by TID Water Operations Managers Rocha and Seth Aldrich to discuss the 2023 irrigation season, how the district operates a more than 120-year-old irrigation system, and how that system and operations have been modernized over the years to perform with increased efficiency and better service for our irrigation customers. Chris and Seth, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
All right. So let's get started. If each of you would please give us a little bit about your background with the district. Chris, I'll have you go first.
Okay, so I started in the district in 2011. I got hired in construction and maintenance. During the irrigation season, I crawled in the pipelines. And then during the off-season, the off-irrigation season, I was on the gunite crew. I did that until about 2013 when I took a bid to come over to water distribution. I started off as a night guy. I worked 5:45 at night until 6:15. I took care of 5 different service areas. Did that for about 18 months, and then I moved to a day spot. The service area that I ran was called Service Area 10. It started at the division on the Turlock Main, and it goes all the way down to drop 7. And then it has upper lateral 3, which goes down Taylor Road through Turlock. It's just north of Turlock. And I did that up until about 2 years ago when I got promoted to Water Operations Manager, and I've been doing this job ever since.
Right on. And Seth, how about you?
I was a teacher before I got hired here at TID. I taught 8th grade English, adults, ESL courses, and I joined the district in 2017 as a water distribution operator for Service Area 9, where I irrigated the land between Turlock and Houston. In 2020, I became Water Operations Manager, and I'm currently teaching a course at MJC called California Water.
So you've kind of come full circle from teaching to TID and dabbling in some teaching.
Yeah, it has provided some more opportunities in the water world, which is very interesting to me. So I really enjoy it.
Awesome. All right. So anyone who has listened to the TID Water and Power podcast before knows that there's a lot of jargon that goes along with our industries. And we typically try to be good about kind of catching that in the moment when we're discussing it. But this time I want to actually start out with some terminology that is commonly used in water distribution. So let's jump into a couple of these terms, and if you guys could kind of help us out with a quick definition of each, that would be great. What is meant when we say acre feet?
Acre feet is a measurement of water. It's a measurement of volume. So the water's not moving, the water's static. And an acre foot is exactly what it sounds like. It is how much water it would take to cover an acre of land in 1 foot of water, 12 inches. In gallons, it's 326,000 gallons. That's a lot of water. And so it helps often to kind of picture this in your mind, but if you pictured a football field covered in 12 inches of water, that would be very close to an acre foot. Although I will mention that a football field is slightly larger than 1 acre, but it's close enough.
Good visual reference anyway. Okay, and what about cubic feet per second?
So cubic feet per second is like a term that's universally used to measure moving water, like in rivers and in streams. We use it for our canal system. And so like a term that we would use is like 15 feet, right? Well, we mean 15 cubic feet per second. 15 cubic feet per second is what we call a standardized head that we deliver to our farmers. That's a flood irrigation head, which 15 CFS is rolling through your gate while you're irrigating. It creates enough pressure to push out your gates and valves and irrigate your land.
Awesome. And you hit another one I was going to ask about, head of water. So you said that's typically 15 CFS based on, and how is that determined?
So that is correct. Historically, when this district was built, we deal with larger volumes of heads of water. A standard, one that I dealt with in my area was a 15-foot head. Now, when you go south, it could be up to 20. But a head of water is basically what you give to your flood irrigators when they're irrigating.
And what's going to make that determination, whether that's 15 or 20 or somewhere in between?
It depends on the size of the pipe, the lay of the land. Like if there's a fall and you have a 36-inch gate and it's going into the field, the water's moving a lot quicker. The leveler ground doesn't seem to pull as much. So you might be 12 to 15 CFS, depending on where you are from the canal.
Okay. All right. So again, we've got cubic feet per second, and that is measuring the movement of the water. We've got acre feet, which is measuring the volume. And then I've also heard a term gallons per minute. Seth, what does that mean?
Gallons per minute, or GPM, is it's a unit that we don't use very much here. Gallons per minute is usually used in a conversation between a grower and an irrigation designer. And the designer is typically designing a pump or pressurized system that's going to take a certain amount of gallons a day. And so they do gallons a day. We don't typically use that here because we're using high volumes of water. And the numbers become so astronomical with gallons that they kind of lose their meaning when you're talking million gallons a day. So we stick to cubic feet per second, or CFS. That's kind of our bread and butter. That's how we think usually. And then designers are thinking in gallons per minute, and growers typically are thinking in hours. And what I mean by that is the growers know how many hours of water they need at a certain flow, and then we know what certain flow they need. So those things kind of coincide together to make it work.
Gotcha. And that's the hours they need to complete the irrigation on a particular parcel.
Yeah. If they have large parcels, they break it up into what's called checks, which are just smaller portions of the same parcel. And you fill those checks full of water, and then you move to the next check and you move the water on your land in that way. Very
good. All right. And then one more definition, spill. What do we mean when we talk about spill?
Spill is a word that has several different meanings. For the purposes of what we do, Chris and I manage what's called a gravity-fed spill system. So the canal system is powered by gravity. And at the end of the system, there is space for water to spill or to continue past our system into the river. I like to talk about this just because I think the word spill by itself has connotations of not watching the water closely. And I made a mistake and I spilled the milk. However, that's not how it's used in the context of the irrigation system, because we have a spill system, which means there is a relief for the amount of water that's coming down. If something was to happen that was not planned out, there is an escape for this water. In a closed system with no exit, you would risk blowing something up or breaking the system. But in a spill system, it just means that at the end of our system, water can escape to the river if it needs to. And we would call that water spill water.
Okay, very good. Okay, so let's jump into the 2023 irrigation season. Let's start with a quick hydrology update. It seems like things have taken a pretty positive turn with some of the rain we've gotten recently. What can you tell us about that?
That's right. Thanks to a very wet December and January this year, we are in a totally different position going into this season. We're well above average. We are definitely going to fill the reservoir, which is a drastic change from the last 3 years.
Absolutely.
What happened in those months were we had 4 atmospheric rivers that came through back to back and dumped quite a bit of water. And currently there's a storm dumping quite a bit of snow on top of that, which we will capture later as it melts. And just in those 2 months, we received enough water that we knew we could give our farmers this year a full allotment of water, which they're all happy about. And so we're in much better shape moving forward.
Awesome. All right. So then what does that mean with regard to setting the 2023 irrigation season, which our board of directors recently did?
The start of the irrigation season was delayed slightly due to recent storms, but began this week. The season will end on November 1st. One of the best pieces of news that the farmers have a full allotment this year. A full allotment for our farmers is 48 inches of water during the growing season. This is the first time we've seen this since 2019. This also affects in the way that we run garden heads. Garden heads are people who irrigate with small heads of water, that is a smaller amount of water, and they're usually on pipelines where there's several people sharing the water, and they will be able to irrigate every 2 weeks this year. In comparison to last year, they were able to irrigate once every 4 weeks. So this is doubling the amount of water that they'll be able to use this year.
Wow. And like you said, a full 48 inches for our growers. So that's a big improvement.
Yes, it's great.
Awesome. All right. Anything else unique to the 2023 irrigation season, given the amount of water that's available this year?
One of the very interesting things that we're doing this year, right now actually, is with gas prices being elevated as they are, we have been running water through our hydro units to generate power. We've been blessed with the right amount of water at the right time, at the same exact time as the gas market is elevated, and we're able to save quite a bit of money by doing that. And we only use part of our canal system to do that. So it's been kind of a symbiotic relationship between the electrical side of TID and the water side of TID.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A good example of the way the two sides of the house work together. Another term that I've heard talked about is replenishment water. What is replenishment water, Chris? And is that something that's going to be available to our growers this year?
Okay, so historically, whenever we've delivered replenishment water to growers, it has been in a 48-inch year. Now, what we try to promote is putting water into the ground and replenishing the aquifer. And so that's where we get the term replenishment water. We just basically deliver, a couple more irrigations to those growers when in need, and they put it into their ground. Some of them turn off their drip systems and flood irrigate. So that would basically, when you hear the term replenishment water, it's basically you can irrigate, a couple more times over the 48 inches, and that's the replenishment water that they're talking about.
For the purpose of recharging those groundwater aquifers.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So how does the 2023 irrigation season then compare to a normal water year?
For comparative purposes, last year we gave our customers 27 inches of water. Okay, this year we're giving them 48. So you're looking at like roughly almost half of an increase, right, or a reduction, depending on which year you're looking at. And when you start getting into 30 inches and below, that's when things become much more difficult for our customers, and they have to be very creative. So a 27-inch year is a difficult year.
For sure.
People have to make some tough decisions, and below that is even more difficult. The irrigation season also started later last year. We started at the end of March, and then we ended October 12th. That's a major difference.
So knowing last year that it was a shorter season and there was less water to go around, it's kind of incumbent on the growers then to spread that water out for the duration of the season. Is that correct?
That's correct. We do rely on the customers to make their decisions about how they are to use the water. We don't tell them how to use the water.
Sure.
And I think a little bit later we probably talk about this, but we've created some tools to help them do this. But more importantly, we just try to stay in contact with them, and as they're approaching their final irrigations, that's communication that we try to get out to them so that they can make well-informed decisions.
Very good. And yes, I definitely want to revisit talking about the tools that are available a little bit later on today. So when we have a year where there's less water available, what we consider a dry year, does that also then change the rate schedule that our growers pay for that water?
Yeah, we have what's called a dry year rate schedule. And so you do end up, the water's more expensive in those years. And why that is because we're pumping more. So to cover the cost of pumping, which is the electrical cost, to cover that, the water is more expensive. And that means a few different things. It doesn't just change the rates. It also changes the quality of water that people are irrigating with, the source of water that they're using. It changes quite a few operational things in the field as well, not just the amount of money they need to pay for the water. But that is true. That changes, the rates will change depending on good water years and poor water years.
Okay. All right. So let's talk now a bit about the actual irrigation system itself. So TID, as we know, is the first irrigation district in California. We were formed in 1887, and our first irrigation delivery actually came in 1900. Today, we utilize much of that same irrigation system, although it's gone through, obviously, some improvements over the course of the last 100 plus years. Tell us about the system and how it is that being so old, it's still able to serve us so well so many years later. Chris, you want to help us out with that?
Yeah. So 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, they built LaGrange Dam, and it's basically on the Tuolumne River, and it's a diversion for MID and TID.
And when you say diversion for MID and TID, what does that mean?
If you're thinking just like a lateral, just think of the Tuolumne River as a lateral, right? Or a canal. Well, there's multiple canals that come off of our main canals, right? Well, the Tuolumne River is our main canal. MID uses 33% of the water in Don Pedro. We use the 66% of the water in Don Pedro. So when it's coming down from the powerhouse Don Pedro, it hits LaGrange Dam, and LaGrange Dam elevates and pushes the 33% towards Modesto and the 66% towards TID. So that was there over 100 years ago. It's basically a gravity-fed system starting at LaGrange Dam. It sends it our way. LaGrange does not store water. It's designed to raise water level to the height of the canal system. At LaGrange, the water can flow into TID Canal, MID, or to the Tuolumne, depending on where we're sending it. Headgates at LaGrange is the start of what we call the upper system. The upper system takes the water and puts it in Turlock Lake, which is like a big holding pond for this whole area of the district, right? Water for irrigation is released from Turlock Lake into the main canal, which is where we start our operations. It then goes down the main canal into various canals and laterals for delivery.
Okay, so the water that we deliver is, as you mentioned, from the Tuolumne River, and that's largely stored at Don Pedro. And like you said, that's kind of the upper end of the system. And then once it goes past LaGrange and we feed it into Turlock Lake, that kind of acts as, like you said, a big holding pond for the water. What's the benefit of having Turlock Lake there and using that storage capability versus just running water straight through from Don Pedro into the system?
So when it leaves Don Pedro, we're talking about days, like maybe a couple days before it gets to Turlock Lake. So what that creates is better flexibility for our growers. We can control it better, and we can control the timing from releasing it from Turlock Lake.
So really then, Turlock Lake just brings that water closer to the start of our system so that it's almost more ready for you guys when you need to call on it.
Yes. So the flexibility is there. The control's better. The timing is there. We have a canal rider. He brings it down and makes the release in the morning. And we have 250 miles of canal that have to be walked down. So the canal rider walks it down each main canal and delivers the water to the ditch tenders, which release it to the growers. We only make a couple releases per day.
And what kind of defines our territory?
So what defines our territory in a nutshell, right? If you were to look over the district with Google Maps, I'm trying to put this in your guys' perspective, right? You're looking over our district on Google Maps, and you see the Tuolumne River, right? So everything south of the Tuolumne River to the Merced River, that's north and south. And then to the west, the San Joaquin River. And then basically it's not all the way up to the mountains where we deliver water. I usually use the Hickman Road line and then the surrounding parcels that are around the main canal, as far east as the main canal goes. And it's not very far off the main canal, but that's pretty much in a nutshell our boundary.
All right. So while most of TID's irrigation water comes from the Tuolumne, I think we've already mentioned that's not the only source of irrigation water. Is that right?
So we operate the system in conjunctive use. We use surface water to deliver flood irrigations to the farmers. We also use groundwater pumping, and we do this in strategic locations. It gives us better flexibility. It helps us control our canals better. And a lot of times when we pump, we're flooding right over the top of these parcels that they're pumping. So it replenishes our aquifer. TID is known as a net recharger of the aquifer because we have mostly flood irrigation going on throughout the district. We do supplement with some groundwater. The amount varies by year type. Like this year, since there's going to be a full allotment, we probably won't be pumping as much. In a nutshell, the numbers: 80% surface water, 20% groundwater in dry years. We do it in strategic locations throughout the district, right? Like the bottom end, basically, they have a higher aquifer, right? So we have to pump in that area, but it's kind of strategically put because it's at the bottom end of our system so that we can also use those pumps that are in the bottom to have better control of our system down there at the bottom so that we spill less. That's what we basically use most of the pumps for.
So that we can spill less, but also make sure we have water available for growers at the ends of the system. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that. I have some questions for you on that as far as how we get the water all the way through and some of the challenges that go along with that.
That is correct, because we do have times where the system gets shorted. And for customers, we can clink the pumps on and get them water, and the guys on the bottom, it's some parts of our system aren't controlled, right? So the water's coming down and we have no way to stop it or create water, but what we can do is turn our pumps on. Okay, so when there's a huge fluctuation coming through, if we time it correctly, we get the pumps on, and then it feeds the guy irrigating at the bottom, and then he never runs out of water. So we do use pumps in that. We do use pumps that way as well.
Okay. And I want to go back and talk a little bit more about the gravity-fed irrigation system, because that's kind of a big thing for our listeners to get their minds around. It's gravity. Once we send water, it's going, and it's not stopping.
It doesn't stop 24/7. The water is moving. And if you're driving down, just say, I'm going to use Hatch Road as an example, and you're driving down there, and everybody talks about the falls and the waterfalls over the canal. Well, the waterfalls on our canal system are called drops, right? It's holding the water back. Creates this elevation to where when these guys are in the pipelines and they're irrigating, it creates pressure into their field and it pushes the water across it.
All right. And then tell us a little bit more. We kind of touched on this, but what happens at the end of the system?
So if we manage the system correctly, we spill minimal, and it has to do with coordination with the ditch tenders and the farmers. We have handoffs. If something goes wrong and we don't catch it, water is going to spill out the bottom. Now, if everything goes correctly, the canal should move fairly safely, and we should be fairly efficient on the bottom end.
It sounds like it requires a lot of teamwork.
Absolutely, a lot of communication for sure.
All right, so let's get a little bit deeper into our irrigation operations then. Seth, can you kind of tell us a little bit about the size of the TID service territory?
Yeah, we irrigate about 147,000 acres of land here. Total acreage in the district irrigation boundary is about 197,000. And then we define the boundary, like Chris said, we're flanked by the rivers. So the Tuolumne River to the north, Merced to the south, the San Joaquin to the west.
All right, that's a really large service territory. How do you manage an area that big?
It is a large territory. You can drive for a long time and still be in the same district. But the way that we manage it is we break it into sections, and those sections are called service areas. And we assign people to stay in those particular service areas. And what happens is they learn their beat. What I mean by that is, on average, it takes about 3 years. But if a guy stays in the same service area for 3 years, typically they know where everybody lives, right? They know all their pipelines. They know how people are passing the water to each other. And this knowledge allows them to be very effective in that service area. And then they're sitting next to somebody who's working the service area just adjacent to them. And then they can communicate. If one of them runs short of water or one of them has too much water, they can communicate, and then they can move their water to where it's best needed. And this is how we're able to reduce spill numbers, especially in drought years. And last year we did a very good job of this. And we spilt less than 4% of the water. In each service area, There are roughly between 200 and 500 customers that are irrigating, and the service areas are all unique. Some service areas have one canal. Some service areas have a lateral and a canal. Some service has 4 canals and a part of a different canal.
So the 15 different service areas then, how are those divided up geographically? How do you kind of create the boundaries for each service area?
They are divided geographically. So it makes sense that if you're going to run a lateral, you're also going to run the pipelines that are connected to that lateral. So geographically, yes. By location, they are divided, and we have a total of 36 operators. We call them water distribution operators, or WDOs. And those 36 guys are broken into 2 shifts. There's an A and a B shift. How this works is one operator will come in on Thursday, and he'll work 7 days in a row, 12 hours each day. And on the 7th day, that will be his last day of his shift, and his partner will come on the next day and work for the next 7 days. And so you have a 7 on, 7 off rotating schedule. And there's 15 of these people on during the day. So we have 15 guys on during the daytime. They are scheduling the water, fielding the calls, solving the problems. And then at night, we reduce down to 3 operators to run for the 12 hours of the night shift.
All right. So that's kind of a big difference, having 15 during the day versus 3 at night. How are we able to make that happen?
So as a former night guy, I'll answer this one.
Yeah, please.
So I started off as a night WDO. And one of the first things that I was trained is these guys will put their canals to bed. Okay. So what they mean by that is they handle pretty much majority of the phone calls, other than the calls that are coming in saying I'm finishing, right? So the day guy sets up his canal the way he wants it to run. He notifies the night man. The night man takes his notes. The night man might have to move water here and there. But basically he is making sure that the canal is still in good shape. Everything's running on schedule for the following day. Now, they're not just out there driving around. They're managing 5 different service areas. That's why you put it to bed understanding. As a day guy, you put your canal to bed understanding that the canal, the night canal tender has multiple areas that he's covering. And so basically they're making sure nothing happens. They're turning on and off pumps, right? So, and then they're moving water accordingly to wherever the day guy has lined it up. They're also trying to keep track of the heads so they can report it back to the day guys in the morning so that they know where their water's at when they come in. They're not doing the hardest part, which is scheduling, but they're pretty much like an MVP, because if something goes bad at night, right, then it could really throw off the next day for the guy working during the day. So they're very important. They're just covering a lot more area.
So it's kind of the guys that are on, the WDOs that are on during the day are sort of creating the plan, and then they turn that over to the night crew, who is then carrying out that plan. Absolutely.
They're keeping track of the water, and they're making sure that we're not spilling as much, turning on and off pumps, and they're making decisions based off of emergencies if there are any. But other than that, everything is there for the night guy to play out from the day guy.
Okay. And again, we had mentioned it earlier, communication. I would imagine there has to be a certain amount of communication between the day WDO who's then transitioning to the night WDO. How does that work?
So there's a shift overlap, right? So, 15 minutes before the day guys go home, the night guy comes in, and then that 15 minutes is enough time for the day guys to play it out one by one to their night guy. And then on the back end, right, the night guy stays 15 minutes over and lets the daytime canal guy know exactly what's going on in the service area so that he knows when he gets there, and then he can play it out throughout the day. And then the night guy comes in and it's a rotating circle.
Right. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about what the WDO's role is, but they don't all have the same role. Outside of the 30 guys who are doing that day shift, what are some of the other positions that help make everything run?
So we have day guys and we have night guys, and another unique position that we have is called the canal rider. The canal rider is operating like a water distribution operator for the other operators. So for example, a day guy is scheduling water figuring out what his demand is going to be, ordering that water in, and then delivering it to people on his canal.
Based on the needs of his growers.
That's right. And he's making sure that his growers are passing the water and following instructions. And so the water's moving down the canal as it should. A canal rider is doing the same thing, but they're bringing water from the lake and giving it to the other water distribution operators. So his customers are our operators. So what he'll do is, it's kind of a lonely job. He drives way up into the hills to the lake, and he'll call power control, and he'll request the demand of water for that day. They'll confirm it with him over the phone, and then they'll release that water from the lake. He drives down at the same speed that the water's moving and is making adjustments down the main canals as he approaches where our other operators are.
Now, I'm going to stop you right there real quick. When you say making adjustments, what does that mean? The water's coming.
That's right. So the water's coming, and like Chris said earlier, we can't stop it because gravity's pulling it down, and there are these drop structures in between the lake and our other operators. And these drop structures are ensuring that the water stays at a certain elevation in the ditch so that we can maintain constant pressures to the customers that are in that drop. And so what the canal rider is doing is, like, for example, let's say we brought in 50 cubic feet today. He would go up there and call in 50 feet. And then as he comes down, he approaches each drop and he opens the drop for 50 feet. What that does is, although he's bringing in more water to the same location, the same drop, it doesn't raise the drop because he's made the opening in the drop larger. And so although there's more water moving through that drop than there was previously, the elevation doesn't change because he's making these adjustments at the drop. As he moves down the canal, he comes to Hickman, into what we call the division, which is where the water is split. We bring the water down in one main canal from the lake, and then it's split down the Ceres main, which goes down Hatch Road, or the Turlock main, which heads south just at the base of the foothills. As he brings this water past other operators' canals, if they ordered water that day, then he will call them. He will say, hey, your water's going to be there in 30 minutes. I want you to take it in 30 minutes. And what that does is that ensures that on the main canal, as he brings in, let's say, 20 feet, as that 20 feet approaches, let's say, service area 8, who ordered the 20 feet, as it gets there, they take it out. So it doesn't disrupt the main. It doesn't change the elevation in the main. As soon as it gets there, we have taken it out. And it's a timing thing. The timing is crucial in a gravity system. And the canal rider is kind of in control of the timing.
Okay, so the whole start of this process for any grower that wants to irrigate is you have to first what's called order the water. What does that mean, and how does that process work?
So you do need an order to receive the water. What that means is people typically call into our call center, or they can order online. The online tool is very useful for ordering water because it is 24 hours, so a lot of people enjoy that. You can order water after hours or in the moment, and it works very well for people. What they typically do is they're having a conversation with our call center, and they're telling them what parcel they want to irrigate, where do they want the water, and for how long. So they'll say where they are and how much water they want, and then that gets sent to us. They typically think in hours, so they're ordering in hours. Very rarely does somebody call in and order like 2 acre feet. That doesn't happen. Yeah. So they order in hours. And what we need from them is their parcel number. We need the side gate. The side gate is the number of the gate that they open at the canal to send water into their pipeline. All of those orders are collected in our office, and then our WDOs schedule those orders, and they typically are scheduling out 48 to 72 hours ahead of receiving those orders.
So let's say all of these orders have come in on a Monday. How are the actual deliveries scheduled?
So a WDO is going to come in the morning, and they're going to first check on what happened the night before, because that's going to determine their schedule for the current day. and then they're going to receive orders. So when they receive orders, you need to remember that they're still currently running water, right? And they're running the schedule that they planned 3 days prior.
Sure.
Right? And then they get orders, and then it's the same thing. And now they're running water, and they're scheduling out 2 to 3 days. And they organize these people mostly by location. This is an efficient way to use water in a gravity system where you have people hand water off to each other that are close to each other because the travel time of the water is very short. So, and if you think about that, if you were going to pass water from the top of the canal to the bottom of the canal, you would have to shut down at the top of the canal, and then you need to let that head of water, that amount of water, run all the way to the bottom, which would be hours, and then the next person can start. Well, you've irrigated 2 people with a 2-hour lap in between them.
Right.
There's that time there. And so that's travel time. And so we try to group them together so that the time it takes for the water to travel is very minimal. At times, based on the weather, sometimes we get overloaded with orders. So I'll give you a perfect example of this. If it is hot and dry at any point this year and windy, and the winds are predicted to be over 20, 25 miles an hour, then anybody with almond trees or trees, they don't necessarily want to be irrigating in those conditions because the almond trees have shallow roots, and if you flood that field and then the wind blows real hard, it's going to blow the trees over, and so they tend to hold back. Well, we have a lot of almond growers, and we're all receiving the same weather, right? We're all in the same district, and so if it's windy for me, it's windy for everybody else, and so what happens is a large group of people is waiting. And they're all waiting for the right conditions. And the right conditions come for the whole district. And so this whole group of people that's waiting for everything to pass, they all have kind of the same thought process because they're all doing the same thing. And then they all tend to order at the same time. And this creates a very high demand for water in a very short amount of time, which is very challenging for us. And there's only so many things we can do. We can only irrigate so quickly because of capacity restrictions. And so in those moments, what we do is we will go by location and then by date of order. We try to service people who ordered first, and then second, sequentially down the line. But if things get very difficult, we also consider crop type. So there are some people in the schedule that can't wait for a few more days sometimes, like corn, for example. If you wait a few too many days on corn, you're going to lose it. If you wait a couple extra days on permanent crops like trees, they will be stressed, but they will survive. And so these are difficult situations that we get into, and it doesn't happen all the time, but at times there's discussions of we need to call customers and say, hey, I know you ordered first. I have every intention of getting you the water first, but you have trees, and your neighbor over here has corn, and they need it first. Do you mind if I put them in front of you? And we would go out and verify that this is the case. But sometimes we do that, and we're very thankful when people work together and they allow us to get people the water when they need it.
Okay. So now, we mentioned earlier that the crew of WDOs that's on during the day, they're responsible for creating the schedule based on what orders have come in. But again, as we've talked about, it's a gravity system, and we've got water in the canals 24 hours a day. So that schedule they're creating doesn't just operate on a convenient 9 to 5. We have night irrigations as well. Is that right?
Yes, we do have night irrigations. This is everybody's favorite type of irrigation.
Everybody loves to get up at 2 in the morning and irrigate.
Yeah, it keeps you young. But no, we do, all jest aside, we do irrigate for 24 hours a day. We do not stop. We don't stop on the weekends. We don't stop on holidays. It just doesn't stop. And so for some people, irrigating at night is more of a challenge than during the day, whether they have other jobs during the day where they need to spend their time, or they need their sleep, or it's hard work out there at night, and we understand that. But the reason for that is that we can't stop the water. So sometimes when people call in and they ask, like, hey, why am I getting the water at night? I'll take it tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. Of course. I would love to do that. It's not going to line up that way. And those of you that are listening that have irrigated for a number of years, you know exactly what I'm talking about. What we plan out doesn't happen exactly that way. And so you need to be flexible out there. The head could run early, the head can run late, and irrigation that was scheduled to start at 6 p.m. might not start until midnight. And so you have to kind of be flexible. And the farming world is very much aware of this, and they understand this very, very well. One of the analogies I try to give to people that question the night irrigations is, like, if you just very simply think of the canal as like a cup of water, what we're doing is we're putting water into this cup, into this canal 24 hours a day based on the demand and the schedule that we've made. And so there's kind of this agreement between us and the farmers of, this is how much water you guys are going to be taking out for how long, and this is how much water I'm going to be putting into this cup. And so you can imagine that I'm pouring water in this cup because that's what my customers demanded, and I know how much it is. And so I'm pouring it in there, and I'm going to pour it in there for 24 hours. I cannot stop. And then at the bottom of the cup, they're taking this water out in straws. Well, you can see very quickly that if somebody, even just one person, doesn't take their water out that we anticipate them removing, then I'm putting more water in the cup that's being taken out, and there's a certain amount of time where it will go over the top and it will break. And that's how we break things. Typically, things break out here because they get pushed to the limit too much, or people are shut off and there's a larger volume of water coming down than we are set for. We rely heavily on our customers to know what they're doing and to follow directions, and they do a very good job of that. And you can see very quickly, especially at night when there's less people on to watch, that if people stop taking the amount of water or they take too much, it creates a lot of problems inside of that ditch, and that then takes hours and hours to recover from, and then that schedule gets shifted, which shifts the next 3 days out. And so these
kind of that domino effect.
It very much is a domino effect, and it's very sensitive in a gravity system. It doesn't take much to disrupt it. So we try very, very hard to have clear communication with ourselves as a team and our customers to kind of prevent these issues.
Yeah, kind of brings that teamwork back into play. So now you mentioned that even one grower not taking the water order that they had put in for can disrupt the system. What happens when we have cancellations of water orders? Do we allow cancellations of water orders? This
past year, we implemented a new rule that addresses that. And we're trying to prevent cancellations in the system. And the way that it all unfolded was that anybody that orders the water, and then our operators schedule that water, and then they're communicated to and they're told at what time this water is going to arrive to them. Within 24 hours of that delivery date, if there's a cancellation there, they can be charged for that water against their allotment. That is meant to be a deterrent to prevent cancellations. And the reason why is very clear. Like, if I'm bringing this water in for you on a 24-hour basis and I cannot stop it, if you canceled, then there's extra water in the ditch that has no home. And so within 24 hours, it's difficult to try to get rid of this water. And what tends to happen is if there's a cancellation that close to the delivery date, that water becomes what's called spill water. There's been a mistake. Now I've got extra water in my ditch, and I'm going to lose it. I can't stop it. I can't pump it back. It's going to go to the river and be gone forever. So in order to be good stewards of the water, to be efficient with the water, and to do what's expected of us in the field, we do need everybody to be on the same page. And cancellations do occur, but we would prefer them out past 24 hours so that we have enough time to make accommodations for that water.
Sure, that makes sense. So in a typical season, how many orders are we getting?
So on average, the number of orders per year is between 45,000 and 55,000.
Wow.
The duration of these irrigations on average is about 6.5 hours for flood and about 24 hours for a micro or drip irrigation. And then we also, one of the metrics that we use internally in our department is how many handoffs are occurring in a service area. And that is to say, by handoff, I mean, how many times is a customer irrigating with a head of water and then they are passing that head of water to somebody else, or they're receiving that water from somebody else. That is a handoff. And so we have about 10,000 handoffs a year. And that's where I would say the real work in a water distribution operator's day goes is managing the handoffs. That's the schedule. I think before I started working here, and I think a lot of people from the outside looking in kind of assume that the bulk of an operator's day is spent driving down the canal and making adjustments and moving water. But that's actually a much smaller portion than it is to deal with all of the handoffs and to manage everybody for 24 hours a day.
Yeah, making sure everybody's picking up the water when they're supposed to and finishing when they're supposed to and keep things running smoothly from parcel to parcel.
Yeah, our pipelines are delicate, and one little mistake, if you send it the wrong way, it doesn't take very long, and then we break
and you
it.
have problems. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
All right. So how do these operations then, from the scheduling to all of it really, how do those operations change from drought years to normal years?
Well, the irrigations are still the same. They might try to run with a slightly lesser flow or for less hours and try to stretch things. But the operation of the irrigations is typically the same. And drought operations are kind of governed by like protocols that we have already established. We kind of refer to them as buckets. But drought operations are kind of dictated by the amount of water that's made available. And then we will refer to for example, in a 24-inch year, we're going to do this. And in a 30-inch year, we're going to do this. And so we have that all laid out. A 24-inch year would be considered that's one bucket. And then a 30-inch year is considered a different bucket? That's correct, okay, right? So as the amount of water changes, like greater or lesser, whichever way it goes, there are some adjustments made. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples of how normal years are different than drought years. So in a drought year like we had last year, is under 36 inches. So we developed a drought transfer program for our customers. And this allowed customers to transfer water to each other. Previously, we had no operations like this in the past. And that kind of gave some breathing room to some customers that if they were short water and they needed more water, then they had the ability to go and find it. That happens outside of our operations, but we just provide the opportunity for them to be successful. Another change is when it's a drought year, we have less water in the lake. So that's gravity water, that's surface water. And because we have less of it, we have to find another source of the water. And what we do is we pump some of the water. So in drought years, to compensate for the lack of surface water, we tend to pump more. This is more expensive. The water quality is not as good. It also creates a massive amount of aquatic weed growth in our ditches because of all the nutrients in the pump water. It just kind of the drought exacerbates a whole bunch of other operational issues that we typically deal with. And it just makes things difficult on every level.
Sure.
So during a normal year, because there's higher allotments to the farmers, there's typically a larger volume of water moving through the system. And this is lake water. So the faster the water is moving, it actually helps us reduce aquatic weed growth. It increases water quality. It also helps in flood irrigations because the extra water in the ditch provides more pressure in the ditch, which means people can finish faster. Even though they've set their pipeline the same way they always do, there's more pressure in the ditch, and so more water is going through that orifice than is standard. But no matter what the year type is, we are constantly trying to be as efficient as possible with the water. And this kind of ties into what Chris was mentioning earlier about conjunctive use, where we're pumping water from the aquifer when it makes sense, and we're using gravity water when it makes sense, and then those two things compensate for each other as the demand arises.
Sure. And I think it says a lot that the district, even in those low water years, is trying to come up with these programs like the drought transfer program to help our farmers, give them different opportunities that weren't previously available to them. We're all trying to help each other out.
Yes. And, and it's difficult to see a drought come. And we try to be creative in these types of situations and try to find solutions for people in the best ways that we can. And one of those solutions was that we thought that if you had the ability to transfer with your neighbor, if you needed to, that would help some people get to the amount of water that they needed to finish their crop.
All right. What are some of the challenges that you guys have as water operators?
So, we're communicating with hundreds of people, right? So, you're dealing with different types of people, different personalities. Some people might not jibe with you. Some people might want to be your best friend. It's all kinds of different people. There's also different types of growers out in the field. We have, big operations with multiple employees that we're delivering water to. And then we also have, the one guy who has 10 acres that's got, 5 beef cattle on it that we're delivering water to. So there's hobby farmers as well, just growing their fruits and vegetables. So there's all kinds of people. You pretty much name it. We're dealing with them. If it's a big farmer, a medium-sized farmer, or, a garden head guy, we're dealing with them pretty much on a daily. We're also dealing with people changing their field types, right? Changing the way they irrigate. One guy could have corn in his 80 acres for 1 year, and he might double crop it, and the next year he wants to rent it out to his neighbor. And now we're dealing with a drip system in there, drip or micro system, where they're doing trees or sweet potatoes or any other type of crop, but the way we deliver the water could be different that year. It's ever changing.
And let's talk about that for a second, because there once was a kind of a big push to switch from a flood irrigation system to more of a drip or a micro. Is that kind of the going trend still, or how do we balance flood irrigations versus somebody who's using a drip or a micro system?
So you're right. In 2013, was a huge drought, right? And the state came down with a bunch of grants that they gave to farmers to switch to drip systems. And then we see drip systems popping up on ground that's been historically flooded for, 100 years. What they're doing is they're told that it's going to conserve water, but, they're really irrigating more frequently. They're irrigating every couple days. They're putting in a drip system, even though they're not taking that much water. By the end of the season, it comes close to what they've used when they've flooded.
But it comes close to what they've used, but we're also not getting the recharge out of that we would from a flood irrigation system. Is that accurate to say?
Absolutely. So when they're dripping, basically the water that's seeping into the ground is just hitting the root base. Okay. So there's not much that's seeping into the aquifer, if any at all. So when you drip or micro, you're basically, hitting the root system. When you're flooding, the water is seeping down. Whatever's not getting soaked up in the ground is going all the way into the aquifer.
Okay. Yeah, I can see where that would be a challenge of a different kind.
Yes.
All right. And then how about growers cooperating with each other? I can't imagine that's ever a challenge.
So, there's farmers that get along really good with their neighbors, and then there's farmers that, tend to not like their neighbors, right? So we do have to deal with that. Sometimes we're the neighbor mediator. We don't promote that. Normally we try to play nice or get them to play nice. We're all here just to deliver the water. So, sometimes we are a mediator for some guy talking about his neighbor or the neighbor, vice versa or whatever. But really, the operators basically, they try to deliver the water most efficiently. And if they can avoid conflict with that, they do. If not, sometimes it is what it is.
Okay. All right. So as we mentioned, the system itself is over 120 years old, but we've continually, obviously, made improvements to it to keep that a functioning system. Seth, can you tell us a little bit about some of the modernizations that have been made to the system to keep it running efficiently, even this many years later?
We've invested about $60 million into making our gravity system more reliable and more efficient. The older it gets, the more cracks it has and the more ways water can escape. So we're constantly investing in this system. One of the big ticket items that we have that you might see out in the field are automated gates made by a company called Rubicon. These gates are installed all across the district. They're not on every side gate, but they are on the largest pipelines. As money becomes available to put more technology in, then we're getting the pipes that we haven't been able to get. And so we've also installed these in our system inside of the canal. So they're also in drop structures. And these electric gates are also in the heads of all of our laterals. So this kind of technology allows us to do a couple things. One, it allows us to have remote viewing capability. So from the office, we can see a couple things. We can see how much the gate is open. We can see when it opens and when it closes. We can see the level of water inside that drop that the gate's pulling from. And we can also see the flow of water measured in cubic feet per second, or CFS. We can see that all on a graph that's displayed on a computer that's either in our truck or in the office. So the Rubicon gates are a very large investment we've made. They're not cheap, but they give us quite a bit more control and viewing capability over the system as a whole.
And if any of our listeners would like to find out more about the Rubicon installations that TID has completed on our system, you can check out podcast episode 9 with Chris Harden, who will get into a little bit more detail about that. All right. So now there's another unique quality to our system, Seth, and that's that we have what's called an open system. What does that mean?
We have an open system in that, well, for example, if you're driving down the road and you see the canal, you can see it because it's open, right? It's out there. It's not enclosed. Okay. So the alternative would be that it is closed in a pipe, right? And if you enclose it in a pipe, you can build pressure. You can artificially build pressure. We don't do that. We don't have the ability to do that. We build pressure with our drop structures because the system's open. And this means several different things, mainly that when the system was designed, it was intended to flood irrigate everywhere. But flood irrigations aren't possible everywhere for various reasons. Sometimes the land's uneven, or some people have property that are adjacent to the canal, and the property, the ground is as high as the water level in the canal, or it's higher. And you can't. That's impossible. That's running water uphill.
Can't run it uphill. Right.
So in those systems, you need a pump. You got to lift it up and move it. And so that's kind of what our system is made to do. Now, as you guys mentioned, there's a want to convert a lot of these flood irrigation systems into pressurized micro or drip irrigations. And this is where the issue with that is what we're trying to do is we have these concrete, very old pipelines that are made to flood. So there's a lot of water moving through them. There's a large volume moving through them, and it's moving very quickly. When you convert that to a micro or drip irrigation, what you're doing is the water is no longer moving very quickly through the pipe. Now the water is going to fill the pipe up and become static, and it's going to build pressure and push out in all directions. And that pressure is going to be used through a system and go through micro sprinklers or a drip system. The issue with that is the pipes weren't made for that. They were made to get rid of the water very quickly. And instead of getting rid of it very quickly, we're taking a very small amount of water and using the pipe as a reservoir, right? They're pumping out of this thing. And when that happens on older concrete pipes, we see maintenance costs goes up considerably, because what can happen is, let's say in the past, I've irrigated my property in 6 hours, flood head. So I got a flood head through my pipeline and I'm running it 6 hours. Well, that's 6 hours of the flood head in that pipe, living in that pipe, right? And whatever wear and tear is in there, it's there. When I convert to micro drip, it's typically a lot longer than 6 hours. We're looking at like a 24-hour or a 36. I've seen people run 100 hours. And so what happens is I'm taking a pipe that was built for short bursts of very quick water, and I'm turning them into like a holding bay where I'm going to pressurize it and I'm going to leave it on there for a lot longer of time. And that's why maintenance costs tend to go up. And that's why we have an open system.
Okay, very good. All right, Chris, I want to talk about a kind of a newer-ish component to our system. Again, considering that it's 120 years old. And that's regulating reservoirs that we've added in the last decade or so. What is a regulating reservoir and how do we use them?
So we kind of spoke about, having Turlock Lake off of Don Pedro, right? Well, I would consider that like a regulating reservoir for the district, right? We can control the water better. So in 2015, we tried this out on the canal system. We put it on the Highline Canal. We thought that was a good spot to put it because the Highline Canal is, 26 miles long. We release water. It takes 24 hours to get down to the bottom. So we put it down there on the bottom of the Highline. When people click off or turn off, we can capture the water in this reservoir. We can start guys up a day earlier on lateral 8 and the water quality is better. The timing is way better. And one of the hidden benefits that we didn't know that we found out afterwards is, that there's a tie-in to lateral 7 and we reduced pumping in that canal 90% groundwater pumping. So
wow.
that was a hidden benefit that we didn't know until after we put it in, but it definitely increases customer service efficiency. And we capture a lot of spill water or whatever you want to call it. That canal historically averaged, 75 to 9,000 acre feet spill loss per year. And we've dialed that back to, 1,000 to 1,500 since that pond's been in there.
Wow. That's really impressive.
Absolutely.
So tell me if I've got this kind of visual right. So a regulating reservoir, we bring the water down. We have the ability to hold a certain amount of water in each of these regulating reservoirs. It almost sounds to me like that's kind of like the Amazon distribution center that's closer to your house. So it's going to allow you to then service the customers along that end of the system that much faster with the product they need, i.e. the water.
Absolutely. We're delivering water through drones, basically. You know what I mean?
Maybe not there yet, but someday.
No. So we fill it up, right? We fill it up with a little bit of water. And then the next day, lateral 8 gets hammered. What normally took, 36 hours to get water down there to fill the demand. Now we can pretty much get it on there 12 to 24 hours earlier.
Wow. That's great.
So we realized this benefit and we purchased some ground 40 acres off of Faith Home and Keys Road, which services our series main lateral, right? The extension. Now there's multiple laterals that are connected to this part of the system. And this regulating reservoir that we're building is 40 acres. We're in the process of doing it now. All the major benefits from lateral 8 should be there.
Sure.
If not greater.
I was going to say, because that's almost twice the size of the lateral 8 regulating reservoir. Is that right?
Absolutely. And when these numbers start coming in, I cannot wait to see how much water we've been able to save for the growers.
Oh, that's awesome.
Now, because lateral 8 was such a success, not only are we built in the process of building one, but we got another one proposed on lateral 5.5. That'll benefit the farmers greatly on that lateral alone, just with water quality and service. Now the date got pushed back when we're going to be breaking ground on that, but it should be fairly shortly within the next year or two.
Okay, awesome. All right. And then some really new assets that have been implemented specifically for our growers in the last few years are the online grower tools that we mentioned at the top of the podcast. What can you tell us about those?
I could tell you that the farmers really like them. Every single one of them that we've talked to, they get real-time data. They get to see their water usage, their available water numbers come up. They could visually see on their computer or email how much water they've used per irrigation. They can order water 24 hours a day, anytime in the middle of the night. They could see what they were using on their phone. They could see what they're pulling from the canal with these Rubicons if it's connected to a Rubicon. The online ordering system also comes with a forecasting tool that was very useful during a drought, right? After your first irrigation, you could see how many hours you went, and then you can project throughout the season how much water you're going to use, so you can plan it out better.
Kind of help you stretch that limited amount of water throughout the whole season.
That last irrigation, yes, and that's sometimes. It's just a very useful tool.
That's great.
The the data that the WDOs put into the computer with like receipts, your irrigation times. You could see those a lot quicker. We send out emails every 2 weeks, and the farmers can see their usage and track it.
And with that real-time data being recorded as soon as it's entered the system, I can see where that would be beneficial both to the grower as well to TID to know how and where and how much water is being used.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then this goes with the forecasting tool. Just say, you get your irrigation done and you're prepping for your next one. And it's a drought year, right? You plug it into the forecasting tool and you can pretty much plan it out accordingly.
And then that summary sheet you mentioned, tell me a little bit more about that.
So the summary sheet's sent out every 2 weeks during the water season. Basically, it's per parcel or per group. You can see your water usage. It has the acre feet that you've used and the acre feet that you have available. You can track it on there, and you can pretty much spread out your irrigations off of that as well.
So you can go online and you've got all of that information on there. And then in addition to that, TID is also kind of arming our growers with that summary information every couple weeks.
So that the summary information is getting delivered. Basically, it starts with the WDOs. You call in your finish times. The WDO writes them down or inputs them into the computer and then sends it to our system. Well, that system gets updated, and every 2 weeks, we are sending your usage to you on the summary sheets.
That's awesome. Lots of opportunities for communication.
Absolutely. It's been growing, and I can only imagine how far it's going to be in the next 5 years.
Very cool. We'll hold that thought because I'm going to come back to you with a question about exactly that. But first, Seth, how have operations at the district changed during your time with TID?
It's changed very rapidly. So, that's no joke. So I've been here for 6 years, 6 seasons. When I first started, we were scheduling pencil and paper, and we're still moving like hard copy papers from office to office, from the field back to the call center, and that's how it has been for
not quite real-time data.
That's not quite real-time data, and that system works, and it's worked for over 100 years. However, the kind of expectations of the world are much different now, and the want of making better, well-informed decisions on the ranch kind of drive the need for better data, more accurate data, quicker data, all of the things that kind of the computer age has made available to us. And so, for the most part, the change that has been so rapid has been moving things to digital operations, and that has happened relatively quickly. So I'll give you a brief example of how much this has changed. So in the past, on average, let's say I irrigated a customer, and that customer wanted to see how much water they had left over or how much water they've used. We're talking like could be up to 7 days. Could be 15 days before this receipt gets processed. It's got to go through a few offices, a few hands, and that is if there's no mistakes on it. Then we got to start it all over again. Now, what we've done is several WDOs internally have been building a new automated scheduler. And why this is so valuable to us is that the schedule now is linked to the receipt and the order. So why this is important is in the past, we would schedule on a piece of paper, and that schedule's separate from the receipt and the order. And so you're kind of dealing with 3 things. Now we've kind of synthesized all of the receipt, the order, and the schedule all into one place, and it's digital. And what that does is as soon as an operator enters a receipt on his computer, that's as soon as you can look at your irrigation information. And so we went from, a week's turnaround time on a receipt to we could do it in an hour. And if you're listening to this and you want this type of information, and let's say you go onto the computer and you don't see it, then I would encourage you to just call your operator and say, hey, I just finished. I'm watching my water really closely. And just call them and ask them, can you please, have you put the receipt in? If not, can you please do that? And as soon as they do it, you can view it from your house. So that has just shrunk the turnaround time on receipts and giving data to the people to hours, minutes sometimes. So that's been very beneficial to us.
That's great. All right, Chris, I told you I was coming back to you. Let's talk about the future. What do you envision the district's irrigation operations to look like in the future?
So I'm going back 10 years and I could, literally pen and paper. We had one computer that everybody used to swap in the office. And, Mike pushed us to move into the 21st century.
And that's Mike Kavarian?
Absolutely.
Who is the
water distribution department manager. And now, we've gone leaps and bounds on what we used to do. There's more remote viewing. We all have laptops in our vehicles. We have our own desktop in our office. We could see the system wherever we're at. We have control over the system wherever we're at. We're putting in reservoirs now. We had lateral 8, 7 years ago, and now we're in the process of putting 2 other ones in. It should be very beneficial to our growers, not alone, and our operators. That's going to be on the series main and lateral 5 coming up. And we're moving closer to a closed system. Now, we're not going to be a total closed system, but there's going to be portions of our system that will be in total channel control. The next one probably will be the series main once the pond is in or the reservoir is in.
And what does that mean, total channel control?
So on lateral 8, there's multiple automated drops and they all talk to each other. And so when we're pushing water out of the pond down lateral 8 to irrigate somebody, if somebody opens up, it's going to push more water down there. Or if there's a change, it'll shut off. And all these drops talk to each other and they save all that water that was going down. They all move at the same time. And then there's the more regulation, SBX 7-7 forced us into the water measurement world. When that water's going through those Rubicon gates, they're getting measured. And we're just waiting to see what the new state regulation is going to be and when it's going to turn to us. And so there's going to be more changes in the future. We don't know when. We're going to open them with open arms, and we're going to keep doing the best that we can with what we've got.
Absolutely. Very cool. All right. One more thing I want to ask you guys about, because we've talked a lot about, automating the system and, the control that we have either remotely or manually with some of these gates and whatnot. I want to know about the Meikle automatic gates, because I've heard they're pretty cool. So who wants to tell me about those?
I'm going to talk while I have a tear in my eye because the Meikle automatics are quickly disappearing from our system.
Uh-oh.
The Meikle automatics are automatic drop structures in that they move on their own. They adjust on their own, and they do this without the need for any kind of electricity or power source. Not even an operator needs to be there as long as it's set correctly and it's operating properly. And what they are is they were developed by our lead engineer Roy Meikle many years ago. And
when we say many, we're talking about decades and decades ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. Maybe 70 years by now. And it's really interesting. In our office, we have hanging on the wall the original patent that he submitted. And you can kind of see the drawings of it. It's pretty cool. However, it's a relic. These are some of the original structures that were in the ditch, and the reason why they're slowly disappearing is because as we update, modernize, and put in these new gates, the old gates get taken out, and some of those old gates are Meikle automatics. We have a certain affinity for them because I wish I could take all of you guys out there to look at them, but water comes down in a ditch and hits the face of this drop, which is made out of wood, and it starts filling up the drop. And then that water gets so high that it fills up another, what do we call this? Another well.
I just call it a bucket bay, right?
Yeah.
If you go up to these automatics and the Meikle automatics, and you'll see a bucket next to them. Well, there's a small overpour on the side of the canal, right? And it's below the water line. Uh-huh. And so when the water, like he was explaining, like when the water's coming down the canal, it slowly builds up and it goes over this overpour, and it starts filling up this bucket that has some kind of weight to it, right? And it floats the bucket. And that bucket's connected to a counterweight off of a steel beam that's possibly a huge piece of concrete. And what that does is the bucket will float. It'll hit the counterweight. The counterweight will lift up the automatic, which is the wood facing or steel facing inside the canal, and let the water go underneath. And it opens up to where it could be 6 inches, depending on the demand downstream, or it could be 30 inches.
It'll maintain that level.
And in that drop, the level of the canal will not change.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
So it's cool how they operate, but the reason why we love them so much is because they take no electricity, no power. So we just can't replicate that anymore.
Sure.
Everything we do, although all of the gates that we've put in, they work fantastic. They allow us a greater reach of control, but they require power. There's other things that you've got to set up. It's expensive to run power out there or to have solar panels hooked up. And these Mikkel automatics work all by themselves, 24 hours a day, with nobody there. And so the maintenance, the low maintenance, we appreciate that because, we have 250 miles of ditches that need maintenance.
Sure.
And so where we can eliminate those, it would be nice. However, that's kind of the story of the Mikkel automatics. They are quickly disappearing, and they are a really amazing feat of it's still technology, right?
Absolutely.
They don't think of it like that, but it was. It's very advanced
amazing
technology
feat
for
of
the time.
engineering, as you
Yes.
said. Yeah. And in general, really, how crazy is it that a system that was built and laid out so long ago still serves us today?
Yeah. I can't talk about this enough. The story that I usually tell to people that talk about the age of this and how to improve this system is we, within the past decade, we've sent, very intelligent people out, surveyors, to try to figure out another possible placement for some of these ditches. Because like our upper main canal is cut into a cliffside, basically, and is a precarious place to be if you're carrying a lot of water. And so they sent out some surveys and some engineers, and they had modern technology. They had computers, they had lasers, all that stuff. And what they found was that there is no better place to put any of these ditches because it was already figured out by the original survey team and engineers. And
Wow.
when you see stuff like that, and you see how they were able to make such great decisions without the aid of computers, is just
Absolutely.
super impressive. And it's a testament to how versed these people were in what they were doing at the time.
Absolutely. That is pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. And we are fortunate today to still reap the benefits of their foresight and the work that they did even then.
We have a lot of respect for those people, and we hope that we operate the system in a way that they would appreciate.
Very cool. All right, guys, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciated all your insight into the TID irrigation system.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Thank you for tuning in to the TID Water and Power Podcast. You can find TID on Facebook at facebook.com/TurlockID, on Instagram and Twitter at TurlockID, and on LinkedIn as the Turlock Irrigation District. I'm your host, Constance Anderson. We'll see you again next time.